want him out running around, so they kept him in the stall for like 2 weeks. But they let him out into a small paddock, and he was out there digging all the dirt up and then rolling in it. So yeah, and that's stuff that he can't do when he's in a racing thing, because he's in a stall the whole time. They don't ever let him out. They either go out and work on the track. So he's actually getting to be a horse. So there is a little bit of it there. Geez, I hope Derek is going to come. He's here. Oh, is he here?
Oh, okay. So, yeah. The one way that I know. And then our one is 5 years.
They won't know who we are.
Okay, the bell has tolled. People have to come in from outside where there's a cool breeze into the sultry, sullen southern atmosphere here.
Question is, was you vaccinated?
Yes.
Okay.
But we're good.
Would you?
I'm going to do this.
So,
All right, are we ready? Ready. Welcome to New Madison, First Unitarian Universalist, First Universalist of New Madison. Glad to have you here on this day, and if you're watching out there, glad to have you out there this day. I see masks here, which is new for us. Again, I want to encourage people to wear their masks, particularly wear them in public. The new variant is spreading like wildfire down south. They are out of the ICU beds. They started the new triage thing, which is, it's sad and yet it's justifiable. It's justifiable on a medical basis. That's what triage is. If you come to the ICU, let's say 2 people come to the ICU needing ICU treatment, there's only 1 bed left. One of them has been vaccinated with both shots, the other has not been vaccinated. They will take the person who is vaccinated to the ICU bed, and the other person will have to wait. And that is not because they are being vindictive or punishing that person for not getting the vaccinated shot. It's because people who have not been vaccinated are dying at a 90% greater rate than people who have been vaccinated. And the whole medical theory of triage is that you save the most people that can be saved. If you come to a traffic accident and somebody is in very dire shape but still alive, and someone else is in serious shape but still alive, you treat the serious person first because they have a better chance of living. You do not waste your resources on someone with very little hope. Now, if you have plenty of resources, everybody gets treated equal. But when resources are limited, which is what's happening in the South, where a huge number of people are not vaccinated, they are beginning to pay the price for that. And I can relate to you. I've worked at the Democratic tent in the fair. The Darke County Fair is on now. And stop by anytime and say hi to the other Democrats in Darke County and Preble County. I actually don't live in Darke County. And it's been interesting, the people we've talked to there who still do not want to get vaccinated, who still do not want to wear a mask, in spite of all the evidence is there. We've talked about that before here. We will talk about it again. What inspires people to go against science, to go against reality? And I can also relate to you that there have been 3 or 4 people who have been really argumentative and difficult to get along with, just walking by and being nasty to us, which I didn't really expect to find in Darke County, but it turns out these people are everywhere, and I don't have to tell you what their political persuasion is. All right, we're glad to have Derek with us again. This is going to be an interesting one, speaking on outrage. I'm not exactly sure what to do with that. He had a nice description of it, and where he's working off of the Tao de Ching. You can pronounce that in different ways, and I've read a little bit about it in the past, and I pulled up some slides on it. These are pretty much hit or miss, so you'll have to tell me whether you think we're on the right button, the right beam, or whether we're off the scale here. But we can talk about that later. All right, do we have any announcements?
We will have our annual meeting of the congregation next Sunday, and we'll have complete fiscal reports, and we'll talk about sort of, where we've been, where we're going, and all those things one talks about at an annual meeting.
All right, preparing for fall with the annual meeting. I think there'll be the telephone connection. If you don't want to come or don't feel safe coming, you can call into the number on the speakerphone type thing, and you can listen, and actually you can contribute. Everybody is more than welcome to contribute, but everybody is welcome to come and be here. It's going to be right after church.
That's correct.
So you don't have to come to church. You can come to the annual meeting, or you can come to both. Once again, there's hand sanitizer in all the pews. There are masks here for anybody that needs a mask. We provide the mask, and everybody keeps a social distance. We want to encourage everybody to do that. I keep saying this over and over. Darke County is only like a 32 or 34% vaccination rate. So even if you've been vaccinated, you still need to be safe and follow safe practices. Okay, our welcome is 644 in your hymnal. An unfailing treasure. I called on God, and the spirit of wisdom came to me. I preferred her to scepters and thrones, and I accounted wealth as nothing in comparison with her. Neither did I liken to her any priceless gem, because all gold is but a little sand in her sight, and silver will be accounted as clay before her. I loved her more than health and beauty, and I chose to have her rather than light, because her radiance never ceases. All good things come to me along with her, and in her hands uncounted wealth. I rejoice in them all, because wisdom leads them, because I did not know that she was their mother. I learned without guile, and I impart without grudging. I do not hide her wealth, for it is an unfailing treasure for the mortals. Wisdom of Solomon, gender changed slightly for the UUs. Okay, cello sliding will be 450. And we're going to use our little meditation gong. I will ring that, and if you want to center yourself think pure thoughts, put away the cares of the world, and become part of our community here at First Universalist. Blessed is the match consumed in the kindling flame. Blessed is the flame that burns in the heart's secret places. Blessed is the heart with strength to stop its beating for honor's sake. Blessed is the match consumed in the kindling flame. And if you'll remember what we talked about last week and actually the week before that, conscience, honor, dignity. Blessed is the heart with strength to stop its beating for honor's sake. Opening hymn is number 1. Oh, wait a minute, I missed the prelude. Sorry, we need to do the prelude. This is a good one. Church is the one foundation. Church is the one foundation. And let me encourage you as I babble on. If I miss something, break those chains of white culture. Shout out, raise your hand, say you forgot something, or just stop, or don't let me just cruise right on through. This is a community, we're all in this together. All right. Anybody know who this is? If you do the I Ching, you know who this is. Lao Tzu. This is one of the persons who is a contributor. Like any historical writing, the I Ching had multiple writers. People argue about when it was written. It was written a long time ago, and it was not written by one person all at one time. But it has that Chinese philosophy, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. Okay, our first slide. The first thing when I thought of outrage, what did I think of? January 6th. What happened to our country January 6th? To me, that is the simplest definition of outrage. All right, our children's story.
Are you doing the hymn?
Oh, first hymn. There you go. Hymn number 1. I have to write bigger on my notes. May nothing evil cross this door. Perfect choice. We have hand fans if anybody needs them. Okay, our children's story is What the Turtle Taught Theodore by Gary Kowalski. As I've said told you many times, I pulled most of my information off of the UU website. They're very, very nice about posting all kinds of information, free for use in any UU, well actually not just a UU church, any church that wants to use it. And Gary Kowalski is one of the frequent contributors. In his autobiography, Theodore Parker relates that as a child, 4 or 5 years old, living on a farm in Roxbury, that would be traditionally UU, Massachusetts, he was walking through the fields one day, absent-mindedly swinging a stick through the tall grass. Many of you can picture that, having done that yourself. This was many years ago in the days before the Civil War. It was summertime. He stopped to watch the water burble along the creek. Then he noticed a turtle sunning itself on a rock. He'd seen other boys use their sticks to strike a turtle and other animals. It was part of what children thought was fun, and I think probably still do. Just as some children still like to bully and hit those who are weaker than themselves. Often children and grown-ups too are copycats, mimicking the behavior of others who seem bigger or stronger than themselves. Young Theodore wanted to be like the other older boys he'd seen, so he raised his stick in the air, taking aim and preparing to knock the turtle into the water. Then something stopped him. Something seemed wrong about that situation. He looked again at the turtle, quiet, peaceful, enjoying the summer day just as he liked to feel the warmth and light of the sun. Had the turtle ever done him any harm? Was the turtle so different than himself? Slowly, he lowered his stick and walked home, thinking about what had happened. When he arrived home, his mother was there to greet him, and he told her about the incident. She listened carefully to Theodore, and listened especially carefully when he related how some strange force inside had stopped him from hitting the little animal. Theodore, she said, that force inside you was the voice of conscience. Always pay attention to it. Always follow what your conscience tells you. It's your moral compass that points you in the right direction. And if you honor your conscience, you will never go wrong in this world. And we've talked about this last week. What is your conscience? Where does it come from? Is it something your parents gave to you? Is it something you read in a book, the Bible, for example? Is it something you read in some moral philosophy that you saw some preacher on TV? Where does your conscience come from? We did not find the answer last week, and we probably won't find the answer next week. Theodore Parker grew up to be a Unitarian minister. In fact, one of the greatest leaders of our faith. He became a champion of the defenseless who needed defending. He was a hero in the fight to end slavery in our country. He prayed to Father and Mother God and fought for women's equality and their right to vote. He and his wife never had children of their own, but he felt a sense of kinship with the whole family of creation, people of all sexes and races who had been made in the image of the holy. And it started one summer day when he was just a child who saw a turtle and decided to do what was right. And should we all follow the example of Theodore Parker? Okay. Sharing of joys and concerns. And does anybody know who Jack Handy is?
Who?
Jack Handy. Anybody ever watch Saturday Night Live about 10 years ago? Remember Deep Thoughts by Jack Handy? When it comes to outrage, and when it comes to the I Ching, and when it comes to people telling me in philosophical Eastern tones about how I should behave and how I should think, that little part of my brain in the back end that always gets me in trouble, it says, pull up Jack Handy. So here's a deep thought of the day. Some people are like slinkies. They don't really have a purpose, but they still bring a smile to your face when you push them down the stairs. That's a Jack Handy. All right. So, and we all have deep thoughts of the day. Here's another picture of outrage. When the sports team came to celebrate, what was served at the White House? McDonald's. And not just a little McDonald's, lots of McDonald's. Okay, now, sharing of joys and concerns.
I think on a worldwide concern for all of us is starvation exists in the world today in the Tigray area of Ethiopia, torn by war and conflict. Their cupboards are bare as of this week, according to almost all international food and relief organizations. So we wish them and our hopes that they are indeed endowed with the sustenance of life. On a more local level, a joy and a concern, our local organization, the New Madison Kiwanis Club, has been a wonderful resource for all of us all of these years. As all service organizations, their memberships are declining. As you know, their major fundraiser that gives them funds to help the community is at the Darr County Fair. They're very short of help this year, and I assume our member, Ken Baker, is probably there helping this morning. But let's wish them well. If you do attend the fair, please stop and patronize them. Even give them a little donation if you're so inclined. But they are still plugging away. I believe as of a week or so ago, they were all our time slots for volunteer at the fair, there were 40 slots short of filling in for that. So it is a tremendous resource. It raises tremendous amounts of money for the community, and we certainly wish them well as they struggle and continue to serve.
Yes. And I can say, as I mentioned before, I was working at the Democratic tent, and you're all welcome to come by and get a free trinket, or actually what we have is what they call riding for Biden. We have a stationary bike, and you get every time you ride 46 turns on the stationary bike, you get an entry to win a mountain bike. And they can be exchanged for different sizes, girls configuration, boys configuration. So you're all welcome to come and do that. But right across the tent from me, or right across the alley from me, is the Texas tenderloins, which I have an affection, almost an addiction for Texas tenderloins. So I went and got one this year, but I can promise you it was the last one I'll ever get. $8 for a sandwich. Scandalous. In a world of starvation, there's no reason to pay $8 for a sandwich. So from now on, after I finish my shift, I'll be going to the Kiwanis tent and seeing what they have to offer. And I may even give them $8, and hopefully some of it will be for charity and not for somebody's pocket. So, all right, I have one, Rick Bohemus, who's been here before. His wife Margie is the co-owner with me for. Actually, I'm a co-owner with her for Curly. That's our pacer, our racehorse. I was at the fair last night. I had to leave early because I had some other stuff to do. I get a text from him, or actually I get a picture from him. He's in the emergency room. Somehow he smashed his thumb and took the end of his thumb off. And they sent him to Dayton to a hand surgeon who said there's really nothing he can do. We'll just have to pray that it'll grow back, which nothing better than a hand surgeon with a sense of humor. So I'm not sure what happened, but we stand by the gate. If you've ever been to the racetrack, there's a gate that slides back and forth that closes the track off. The horses go in, they slide the gate closed. The horses, when they finish the race, those horses come out, they open the gate and then close it again. It slides on rollers, one of those big rolling wire gates. We were standing right there and kept getting our fingers between the two things when they would slide the gate open because they wouldn't say anything. I'm almost sure he had his hand in that thing when they opened the gate and it sliced the end of his thumb off. So keep consideration for Rick and his big bandaged up hand, and we'll see what happens with that. We can't forget Afghanistan. What a mess. It's been a mess. For 20 years it's been a mess, and it's a mess that we're finally getting out of, and we're trying to get as many people out as we can. The only little thing I will say is there's lots of criticism that it wasn't done right and we should have evacuated people sooner. The only thought I have is if we'd have started evacuating people a month ago or 2 months ago, the collapse would have happened 2 months ago, because if the Afghan army saw the United States evacuating 15,000 people, they wouldn't have stood there and said, we're going to keep on fighting for 2 months and then collapse. They would have collapsed right then, so we'd be in the same situation 2 months ago. So enough said about that. Haiti. Just because we didn't hear about it this week because of everything else going on, not only did they have an earthquake, a 7.2 earthquake, which shattered the country that hadn't been rebuilt from the previous 7.1 or 7.2 earthquake, then they got a hurricane on top of it. So all of these people who are homeless and don't even have a tent shelter or a canvas to sit under, sitting out in the open area, getting drenched by 8 or 10 inches of rain, and their only other choice is to go back into a building with aftershocks, which are not stable, and end up being squashed again. So I don't know what to say about Haiti. It's another mess that's been there for generations. So maybe prayer is all we can offer. Yes?
Mike mentioned Ethiopia. That's where my son Jeff is in Ethiopia.
Ethiopia, yes. And we can't forget, just because we haven't heard about them on the news, the fires out west continue unabated. People's property is burning down. They don't say much about it, but the destruction of wildlife is unprecedented. The number of insects, creatures in the forest duff, but also bears, deer, caribou, moose, squirrels, everything that lives in the forest can't outrun these flames. They're all perishing. It's heartbreaking to think about what is going on out there and the change that's being done to the environment. I guess I might as well throw in Lake Powell, the lowest level since the reservoir was built. So water restrictions are starting for Arizona, New Mexico, California, Colorado. That's going to create a tremendous tremendous shock, tremendous change in the agricultural practices of the West. People are going to have to choose whether you want to grow food or whether you want to have water in the city, or can they figure out some way to be intelligent about it, and each of them cut down their usage and manage to share. It will be a test to see.
Vegetarianism.
Vegetarianism
If anybody
means-
studies how much water raising beef specifically, but other livestock as well.
Well, as a farmer, let me say that grasslands would be useless without ungulates, which are animals that eat grass and convert it. Now, I can
Raise them,
see,
don't eat them.
yeah, let me say grass-fed beef. You don't have to eat beef that's being fed corn, which takes irrigation, or alfalfa, which takes irrigation. The Indians did real well on buffalo, and all they ever ate was grass, and we may even want to go back to buffalo and start thousands of herds of grazing the grass, because it will just go to waste if it's not used, and that's the only productive way to use it. So, but once again, like every other problem in the world, there is no simple answer. There are answers that can be worked out if people with good faith and goodwill will share their suggestions and be civil about the way they discuss it and share the resources. It can be done. But there is no simple answer, and anybody who tells you I have all the answers is somebody you shouldn't be trusting. Anything else? Oh, I should be lighting candles here, and I'm not. But you all know you're lighting candles in your mind, so. Anything else? Let's say a word then, and a thought, and a prayer for those worries, those hopes, those fears, and those joys which have not been shared with us, and which anybody at home, if you have a problem, if you have a question, if there's something you need, please contact us. You can leave a message on the phone, you can contact us through Facebook, you can contact us through email, or you can contact any of us that we know personally. We're more than happy to reach out and help anybody. All right, message, outrageous.
It is good to see so many people in church this morning. It's a nice crowd. 14, I think, which is nice. I also want to say thank you to the Universalist Church in El Dorado for releasing me to serve here in New Madison this morning. To
I'm going to
introduce,
interrupt for just a moment. Can we get rid of the picture?
Yes.
After I sat down, I was thinking about that.
distracted, perhaps.
Yeah, we don't need to see some of those bad pictures all during our service. I'm sorry, but thank you.
Good idea.
Yes.
To introduce today's message, I have a reading from Lesson 7, part of Lesson 7 of the Chinese spiritual classic, the Tao de Ching. The master stays behind. That is why she is ahead. She is detached from all things. That is why she is one with them. Because she has let go of herself, she is perfectly effective. So in my news feed this past week, I caught sight of a headline from a major East Coast newspaper. I will not say which one. And the headline read, "Why aren't liberals more outraged by the treatment of women in Afghanistan?" Now there is so much just within that headline that I felt a need to take exception to. And a significant chunk of it is relevant to the spiritual health of most people and the spiritual health of our national community fabric. There are a few things that I will point out and then just set aside on my way to the main point. Each of these things probably deserves a sermon of its own, but I really can only preach one thing at a time. Trying to cram 3 sermons into one is usually a bad strategy. So here are the 2 side points. First, the headline. Why aren't liberals more outraged by the treatment of women in Afghanistan? That headline is actually an accusation that has been disguised as a question, so that it can still look polite and inquisitive, when it certainly is neither of those things. The question is there to make a point, and it is meant to be an accusation. Second, and this is not a popular sentiment to make in our denomination, but I increasingly find that labels like liberal are very, very slippery. I get labeled liberal or conservative depending on what you put me next to. Put me in rural Ohio, and people say, that guy's liberal. Put me in Berkeley, California, and people will say, that guy's conservative. Labels can be useful, they can be helpful, but they have to be used with a certain amount of nuance and care. And most of the time, labels are used carelessly and without nuance. With those 2 side notes jotted down in the margins of our minds, let's move on to the heart of today's message. The part of the headline that I want us to unpack. It is the 2 words inside the questionable question of a headline. More outraged. More outraged. Outrage. A strong moral emotion characterized by a combination of surprise, anger, and indignation, usually in reaction to something. And this is a place where we need to tread carefully. Strong emotions related to anger have a really fraught place in our culture and within our own religious movement. Our tradition lifts up reason as a divine gift. And our tradition has a habit then of either denying the existence of our emotions or suppressing them, because people mistakenly characterize our emotions as irrational. And if it's irrational, it must be something akin to sin, even though we would never use a vulgar term like that in our churches. No, never. But emotion has this problematic place in our tradition. A psychologist that I've been following some of her writings, a UU colleague of mine, the Reverend Dr. Gretchen Woods, referred me to her writings, named Carla McLaren. She notes that our emotions contain a very distinct reasoning process, even if we don't really realize it at first. At a foundational level, our emotions are not purely irrational. Each emotion contains within it a specific reasoning process. But most of us have never been taught the language of that reasoning process. So anger, including its subspecies outrage, is often the mind communicating to us that a boundary violation is taking place. It might be your personal boundary that was violated, or you might be a witness to a vulnerable person's boundaries being violated. But anger often begins at a place where somebody has perceived a violation of boundaries. Now, the major risks with anger are that we either end up suppressing the emotion or we just let it lash out. Suppression, on the one hand, leads us to places where we use most of our energy, more and more of it over time, to manage the suppression, to keep that emotion down and under the rug. Lashing out, on the other hand, puts us at risk of violating other people's boundaries. And then we risk getting enmeshed in mutual conflicts with multiple boundaries being violated and healthy boundaries still not restored. I take exception to the headline's accusation that people need to be more outraged, because I suspect that what they really mean is that people, and especially a specific group of people, need to spew more angry communication in order to be credible. And we are a culture awash in public outrage, and awash in the venting of outrage, and people acting out, lashing out, sometimes violently, on these feelings of outrage. And it is not making us better people. In the Tao de Ching, the author Lao Tzu writes of a figure called the Master. She lags behind, but somehow gets ahead. She exhibits an extraordinary degree of effectiveness because she has practiced a kind of detachment. Now, detachment is neither denial, nor is it acting out. Properly done, it is also not suppression. Detachment is a kind of attentiveness that is a little bit psychological, a little bit spiritual. Detachment sees the reality in front of us or inside of us. Acknowledges the emotion that we have in relationship to that thing that we're observing. But it sees it, and it recognizes it, and it names it without grasping on and holding on to it tightly. Because that's where we get in trouble. Detachment, depending on where you're coming from, can be the product of the still small voice within of the biblical prophets, or for other people it's the product of a Buddhist mindfulness, or in Islamic practice, submission to God instead of ourselves. And either way, it shakes hands with that feeling of outrage, while neither shoving it under the rug or holding on tight. And then detachment, that is what gives us the space to listen for what is communicated, and then to have the freedom to take action in ways that might be more constructive than simply suppressing or lashing out. Carla McLaren, the psychologist I mentioned earlier, she notes that what anger or even outrage presents to us is a chance to pay attention to the universal human need for proper boundaries, healthy boundaries, and an opportunity to protect ourselves and others. And she notes that eventually a healthy interaction with our feelings of outrage can present us with two key questions. What must be protected? What must be restored? I'm going to repeat those. What must be protected? What must be restored? And then we can figure out the concrete actions we need to take to work towards fulfilling the answers to these questions. I know that in the big picture, the newspaper headline I mentioned that began this message was really an accusation, politely disguised to discredit a group of people. But it also contains something that is a major illness in the spiritual life of our nation. We have an unhealthy relationship with outrage. Some of us are living in denial of those feelings, but many more are just spewing and lashing out, as if the communication of increasing amounts of outrage actually helps anything. It does make people feel powerful, though. Anger is a big rush. But this verbal and physical escalation of acting out on outrage, it doesn't help anyone. The venting of more outrage will not help a single woman in Afghanistan. What is needed is the constructive use of anger. When one feels anger and indignation about violence and discrimination against women in Afghanistan, that is actually an opportunity to name the boundary that we see being violated, and then to mindfully take actions towards restoration. Even if that process is going to be long, difficult, and fraught with ambiguity. Now, you might have only a small light to contribute towards that cause and that restoration. But restoration is important. Universal restoration is a cornerstone of Universalist theology where we find ourselves part of a process working towards the restoration, as Universalists of old would say, of all people with holiness and happiness. The restoration of all people with holiness and happiness. And detached, persistent willpower behind long-term efforts will do more than an outrageous diatribe ever can. And there are some constructive places that you can begin from if the concern about the lives of women in Afghanistan, that's something in your heart this morning. One thing you can begin with: persistently pester your representative in Congress about our national responsibility towards Afghanis seeking asylum in the United States. Second, if you have the means to do so, you can financially support reputable relief programs that are in Afghanistan right now, today, this very moment. They are there. Among those that I would recommend right now, it can change as events change, but right now, today, I would recommend the International Rescue Committee, UNICEF, and Doctors Without Borders. They are there right now, this very moment. And if you are upset by conditions in Afghanistan, don't let the fading of any initial outrage you feel to translate into the fading of this issue from your minds. Because that is always a huge temptation. When that rush gets behind us, we just kind of move on to the next thing. Restoration requires long-term, persistent effort. So with that in mind, I'm going to conclude my part of our spiritual exploration for today with words from the Universalist preacher Olympia Brown. Her words feel theologically timely for our place and our time. And this is what she wrote. Do not demand immediate results, but rejoice that we are worthy to be entrusted with this work. You are strong enough to work for a great and true principle without counting the cost. Go on finding ever new applications for these truths, always trusting in the one God which ever lives and ever loves.
Hooray for Olympia Brown.
Hooray for Olympia Brown. And I believe a lot of the context she was talking about was the reconstruction of the South and the plight of African Americans in the South. But her message, I think, applies to a whole set of conditions where it takes constant, dedicated pressure. So I would point out the work that she and others began in the South of the United States still isn't over. We're still working on it.
It's actually going back.
Dialogue. This is one of the things we do, take a little time for dialogue because the message is not only the preacher's.
My comment is that I think the South is actually going backwards, not only the South, or maybe I should say the South is spreading north. The states of Ohio and Indiana are becoming more southern all the time in their attitudes and perspectives. But
And there are some in Georgia who would just lament that Georgia is becoming more northern.
yes. The point I want to bring up is I am really uncomfortable with outrage.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like the reptilian brain has been released, and there's something about my nature that just recoils from that. And there's also education, and other people have taught me that repression or suppression is a really bad mistake as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm looking for that middle ground, as basically as a self-care thing, and still haven't found it. But looking at something like process, in other words, trying to understand the point of view of the other person, trying to understand or find a way to reach the other person, whether it's through empathy, humor, not disparaging them and not using outrage, because that's essentially what they want. They want to get into a physical altercation.
Disparaging people is just one more form of lashing out.
Yes.
And as I see more and more people lashing out, we enmesh more and more of ourselves in these complicated systems of violating boundaries. And then it takes more and more work to unravel the knot. But spiritual practices that some people find helpful for dealing with feelings of outrage, mindfulness, which shows up in multiple sort of contemplative traditions, Christian, Buddhist, Hindu. I have found that trying to practice a certain amount of mindfulness in meditation equips me so that when I do have that response, I can shake hands with my anger and say, that's anger. Exactly why am I feeling that? Because we also have to be careful, because sometimes when we're reacting, We're not always reacting to the boundary violation that's right in front of us. Sometimes we're reacting to things that happened in other places and it reminds us of that, or the person reminds us of somebody who did something bad, or that sort of stuff. But it is hard. But what I found is, because I grew up in a Christian denomination that taught me from a young age that anger was a sin. Anger is sin. So you're not supposed to feel angry. But there are times when I have. And was it bad for me to feel angry when someone mistreated me? No, it wasn't. Sometimes what I did with that anger was not good. But anger is a warning signal in your reasoning process that there's a danger, that there's a violation of boundaries going on. It is a defensive, almost reflex, which is why it feels reptilian. Dee.
I doubt that you could go through it in this time period, but I'm kind of interested in the juxtaposition of outrage and detachment. The movement, if it is a movement from the one to the other.
I don't know it's a movement from one to the other, but it's where you use detachment to acknowledge that the outrage, the feeling of outrage is there.
You're detaching to look at, to recognize, what is the detachment doing again?
Detachment is helping you to recognize that the emotion is there without grasping hold of it, without clinging to it. It also means that in some situations you may be able to move on from that initial feeling in a healthier way faster. In some cases. Some feelings of outrage will be with you for a very, very long time, especially if you had something traumatic happen to you. But it gives you the space so that you're not spending all your energy suppressing or lashing out, so that you can try to respond more constructively. And it takes practice. Our whole lives, hopefully, we're practicing. I worry about those who don't. Because it leads to places where you see, well, mobs of people just sort of lashing out as a group.
Thank you.
Check out mindfulness practices if you want to dig a little deeper. I know. Like one more thing. One more thing to do.
It's not like I don't have time.
But it is something you can do while you're driving or while you're watching TV. Mindfulness is not, you don't have to set aside a special time to do it. I do it a lot of times when somebody passes me on a double yellow line, I'm going to speed limit. And I'm thinking, there's that instant flash of, who is this crazy person? And then I try to say, well, maybe their mother's in the hospital, or maybe their child is in the car, they're sick. There's a reason they're acting like jerks. So, I don't know if that helps.
I'll also just tell myself, I feel angry right now because that person did something dangerous.
Yeah, not only to themselves, but to me.
Because, but once I tell myself that, I'm able, so is there anything I'm able to do about it? No, other than, focus on what I'm doing behind the wheel. And hopefully they're not going to create a problem in front of me that's going to be dangerous. I have a sense we're at the end of this progression.
Yes, time is very short again.
It is.
But I would much rather run along with people being interested than have people falling asleep in the pews. Okay, an offering. And we will be hearing Waltzing Matilda, Perfect.
All right.
Feel free to come up and put something in. If you need something, take it out. If you need something from home, let us know. We're here to help. Fair Week has been a difficult week. And let me say, on our offering, every week in our church we take up an offering. It's good to remind ourselves from time to time the offering is symbolic as well as practical. We know that through it, pledges we build our budget and fund our yearly programs and ministry. We pay our staff, which we aren't, and professional religious leaders, and finance the comfort and beauty of our buildings. And we know that we could easily submit those pledge checks to the church at any convenient time. But we pass the plate, or we ask you to come up and donate to the plate, to make a community expression of thanks for the blessings of abundance, to visibly bring in the harvest, this most cherished hour of our week. Our closing hymn is 108. My life flows on in endless song, and my favorite, since love prevails in heaven and earth, how can I keep from singing? And I can't tell you how nice it is to hear actual singing in the church again. It sounded nice this morning. All right. Our closing words are 474. Unto the Church Universal,
which is the
depository of all ancient wisdom in the school of all modern thought. Feel free to read along.
which recognizes in all prophets a harmony, in all scriptures a unity, and through all dispensations a continuity, which abjures all that separates and divides, and always magnifies all that unifies and brings peace, which seeks truth in freedom, justice in love, and individual discipline in social duties, and which shall make all sects, classes, nations, and races one global community. Unto this church and unto all its members, known and unknown, throughout the world, we pledge the allegiance of our hands and hearts.
Hishab Chandra Sen, arranged by John Haynes Holmes. And you can see by the last slide, King of the Hill. I think that's off now, but it was one of my favorite cartoons. Little Bobby is making his statement. You pay more in taxes than Donald Trump. And if they're wondering why, if those voters could read, they'd be very upset. Some have said I am, what is the term for somebody who expresses anger but doesn't do it vocally or visibly? I can't think of it right now. But it's the person who does it kind of backhandedly, who sneaks it in. That pretty much. I don't really get angry, but I don't suppress it either. I let it out in sneaky ways. So, all right. There are croissants, day-old croissants, like everything I get is day-old back there. There's lemonade back there. There's anything. There's coffee if you want something hot, or you actually can make coffee. And I've got ice cubes back there. You can ice it down. So that ends our service. New Madison Universalist. Have a good week. Wear your mask. Go to the fair. More horse races Monday and Tuesday, starting at 6:30. Draft horses will be pulling. I forgot to find out the date on that. And stop by the Democratic tent and say hi to the few in the crowd in Dark County. Have a good day. Theme from A Summer Place. Perfect for a summer day. Thank you, Lloyd.
How are you, Chaz?
Just